Hello and welcome to Mile High Reefers. I'm Scott Anderson, and I'm finally at a point where everything on my tank seems to be going well. All of the livestock's doing good, all of the equipment is running flawlessly, so I thought this would be a great time to give an overview of the equipment I'm using and how I'm using it. So, come check it out. So I'm going to do this as kind of a top-down overview of my tank's equipment, and on the very top, of course, are the three Giesman Tesla LEDs. And as you can see, they're working great. I'm still just loving the light rack I built. That works perfectly. The modular design allowed me to add another light when I decided I needed it. And other than the minor issues I talked about in the full review, they seem to be working great. As far as coral coloration goes, I've seen no change other than the color change from the light spectrum itself. There seems to be plenty of par here. It seems to be working great. The corals are just thriving under it. The colors are beautiful. So as far as the LEDs go, so far being a month in with the full setup, 2 months in using the LEDs, it's working wonderfully. And then for pumps, I'm still running the JBJ Pump, and I'm still running my JBJ Pump. And the JBJ Pump, I used to have two of them, and I found out they're a little finicky. They have a shaft that goes in the middle that gets calcium built up on them. So if you pull that shaft out and soak that shaft itself separately in vinegar, they work great. So that was the issue I had. I have the other pump running downstairs, and you'll see that in a bit. The JBJ Pump is the most impressive thing I've ever put on a tank. Usually when you buy a relatively cheap product that promises the world, you throw it away in a very short period of time. The JBJ has been on this tank for 6-8 months now, and it has just been flawless. I have ran it in vinegar to clean it, but that's it. It just goes in there, it runs every day, and it works perfectly. So far on the JBJ, it is what I wish every aquarium product was. It just kind of does what it's supposed to and doesn't break. It's the full sump setup. I didn't show you underneath the tank upstairs just because there isn't anything up there right now. But I am just so happy running all this stuff in my basement. It's just working incredibly well. The first thing you'll probably notice is I've got my Frag Tank shut down. Biggest reason I did that was I wasn't getting enough flow through the tanks to keep the detritus suspended, so I was either going to have to buy new pumps or something to keep that flow through. The other problem is that I ended up using 1-inch pipe for my drains, and it's just not adequate. I really want a bigger drain because with this, the pump was able to produce enough water flow that if I didn't adjust my intake valves correctly, that there was the chance that it could overflow. And I've got a 3-year-old. He comes down here with me all the time, and I'm just not willing to take that risk. So I've got plans to bring these back up online. I'm just kind of saving money, making plans. I'm hoping midsummer those will be up and running. I've mounted the BRS carbon reactor up, and it's carbon and GFO, and oddly enough it made a big difference elevating this thing up. With it on the ground, it was difficult to get the water flow right, and bringing it straight up must straighten the lines out enough that the water just flows right through it. And I've had this for about 3 months on the tank. It's working really well. Minor issues I'm having are with the carbon stage. The filter pad that goes on there to kind of hold the carbon in place has floated up. There's a little tumbling of the carbon going on, but it's really not a big deal. So far, so good on that. And then the calcium reactor, as I've showed in another recent video, is working just perfectly. The intake line that pulls the water in clogged up on me. It was probably a slow process that over time that gunk built up inside that line. And I replaced that line, which allowed a lot more water to flow through the calcium reactor, and it ended up spiking my alk really high, so I've actually had to turn down the alkalinity level on this thing. But no big deal, no issues with it. It's actually working really well. But if you are running a calcium reactor, I would encourage you to replace your intake and exit lines because they do clog over time. And the 2 protein skimmers, I haven't cleaned these in a week, and you'll see that the necks are completely full of goo. We got a cup full of goo, so I'm really happy with it. The interesting thing is running these 2 protein skimmers takes the majority of the water flow that comes from my main return pump. That pump is pushing about 2,700 gallons per hour, and I would suspect that 70–80% of the water flow is going to these skimmers. So the downside with the Aqua C skimmers is they take a ton of water flow. The upside is, of course, that they allow you to mount your skimmers outside, and they really do a great job at it. The refugium itself in the tank is working great. I mentioned in a past video that the weirs are gone, and that is because of the flex here. So I'm running it completely weirless. The water is coming in through the big 2-inch pipe you can see in the middle of your screen there. And basically I'm using the live rock and the macroalgae as a filter for all of the micro bubbles that are coming in, and it's running through all that, and I have no micro bubbles in my tank, so that's working extremely well for me. I've had a little issue with a film building up on the top of the water surface since the weirs have been out, and it's, I'm guessing, organic proteins and stuff like that. So I ended up putting the other JBJ pump down here, and that's just turning the water surface so that we don't get that film built up, and that's working extremely well. Like I said, I took that center ceramic shaft out of this thing, soaked it in vinegar, and that did the trick on this pump. I was pretty much ready to wipe this thing off, and by doing that, that took care of it. The drip acclimation using drip irrigation that I showed on a video a few weeks ago, I've used this several times now, and this thing is just perfect. If you can fit one under your tank and make it work, I highly recommend doing it, because this makes the process of acclimating a new fish or coral just so easy. I am so happy with this thing. So definitely I recommend anybody give this thing a try. It cost me $10 at most for this setup. The Trident Pump from Reef is still working really well. I hope it continues to work well. But it is supplying all the needs for the return tank, the skimmers, and all of that. So far, so good on that. You'll see I haven't really done much with the plumbing here. One thing I'm kind of noticing with this hobby is I'm constantly changing and modifying. So I've almost given up on having everything looking super neat and tidy, just because it's almost impossible to do. I'm no longer running an auto top-off system on this. It just wasn't worth it in my opinion. Just too many times the float switches froze in the up position, dumping the full top-off reservoir into my tank, screwing up the salinity, and then potentially burning out my pump. The pump, it never burned out, but it would just sit there and spin trying to suck water out when there was no water to suck, and it didn't go well. I would clean them when I do my water change, and they would still freeze up. So, for simplicity's sake, I just started topping off the water directly from my RO reservoir. And for me, it's super simple to do that, and I can do this on a daily basis, and that's what I've been doing. It's just so much easier, so much safer, no risk of error, and I was having to come down here anyways to top off the top-off vessel. So, why not? It's probably not quite as good as for the salinity, but no risk of mistakes unless it's my personal mistake.
last but not least is the water change station, and this thing is just working perfectly. I'm in love with this thing. This thing has made my life so much easier. Everything I've done, I've got my sump in my basement, I've got all that kind of stuff. This is by far and away the best setup I've had. I mean, biggest bang for the buck, everything. It takes a lot of space, but it is so nice to have it. So I'm still using the bulk Reef Supply RODI system, and that's feeding to this top tank, which is the RO reservoir. And that RO reservoir allows me to feed water directly into my sump or feed water into the bottom tank, which I'm using to mix salt water. And it works perfectly. It's 100% gravity fed. I can feed the water just gravity right down to the salt water mixing tank, and I can feed the salt water gravity right into the tank. So the only pump I ever have to worry about is a MaxiJet 120 that I throw in the bottom tank when I want to mix salt water, and that's completely gravity fed, and I'm completely loving it. There's the full equipment review on my setup. I really like having most of this stuff in my basement. Everything is just working extremely well. I love having the open space. I love having the room to work. I love having the water volumes. I am just super happy with the way things are going right now. So thanks for watching this episode of Mile High Reefers. If you liked my video, I would really appreciate the thumbs up. They always make me feel like I'm doing a good job. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I would greatly encourage you to do so. I've always got new content coming out, and I will see you on the next episode. Thanks again for watching.